Sewing friends, welcome to my sewing room. My name is Beth, and if you're new, welcome. Today's block, called Birds in the Air, begins with some 9 patches, and these 9 patches are made with 2.5-inch squares. This block, I also need some strips, 2.5-inch wide, 2 that are 6.5, and 2 strips that are 10.5 inches long. And then I'll be using some green scrappy fabric for the leaves on this beautiful block. This block also has some applique, and today I'm using light steamacine 2. I'll leave a link below. It's available on Amazon. So the first thing I did was I added those strips to my 9 patch blocks here. I'm using a 2.5-inch square index card to make my pattern. This will give me an idea of how big to make my leaf. So I laid it on my quilt to get an idea of how big I wanted my leaf to be. I drew one side of that leaf, and now I'm going to cut along that pencil line and test it out and see if this is the size that I want for my quilt block, and I think it is going to be a good size, so this will be my pattern to use on my light steamacine. I kind of opened that steamacine a little bit. It's a 2-sided, there's 2 papers, and one of the papers has the glue side on it. So I want to be drawing my pattern on the side that has the glue. I need 12 leaves for each block, so I am tracing them onto my steamacine very close together. I'll just be cutting right along that pencil line when I cut my leaves out. Now that I have 12 leaves ready to go, I found a green scrap, and as you can see, those leaves are not going to fit on my scrap, so I need to cut them apart so they will fit on this strip of fabric. After getting the leaf section the right size, I found the sticky side of my steamacine here, and I'm going to lay the sticky side down on the back of my fabric. After pressing the seamless seam down, it doesn't take long to get it pressed onto the fabric. I took a pair of scissors and just followed along that line and cut out my leaves here. And then I will be removing the last paper. There's still a paper on the back, and I'll remove that little piece of paper, get all of my leaves placed where I want them, and then I'll press one more time. This is such a beautiful block, and I have one more thing to do before it's complete. I need to zigzag, so I had to go to my old Singer, one of my first sewing machines that has a zigzag stitch, and this is one I don't use often, but I do enjoy using it. And like I said, I think I've had it for almost 40 years. This is one of the first machines I purchased as an adult, and I put the zigzag stitch on this machine, a very small stitch, and I'm using a thread that matches the leaves, and I'm going to zigzag around each of those green leaves. Since each of my red 9-patch blocks are different reds, I thought it would be fun to also vary the green leaves on each of my blocks. Red and green is such a classic combo. It can be used all year long, or maybe it'll be a Christmas quilt. Here are all of those blocks after I sewed them together into rows and put the rows together. This is a beautiful quilt, and I looked high and low for another pattern like this one, and I was unable to find a quilt pattern in any of my books here at home. So there is a bit of a mystery what this quilt block is named, but aren't these fabrics just precious? It's a really beautiful quilt, and I enjoyed getting all of these blocks together into a quilt top. And of course, after I get them all together, I'm going to make a quilt sandwich and I'll be quilting it. But today I just want to share about how to make this quilt block. I also want to mention that this quilt pattern will be in my Etsy shop available if you'd like to use the patterns for these templates that I use to make the quilt. Like the quilter before me, I cut my background square 12 inches and then I drafted some patterns for my applique. Here are the 4 pieces of the circle that I will need. I'm going to join them together into a circle, and here are the fabrics that I'll be using for my leaf pattern. The first thing I did is I put my little pie pieces together, alternating the color and making one circle using a 1/4 inch seam. I was pressing my seams of this circle here. I also pressed my background piece of fabric, my square. I'm going to fold it in half diagonally twice so that I have some lines pressed in for the placement of my circle. I'll be putting the seams on those lines. I also used a little pattern, little template for the center of my circle. This worked better for me, getting that circle in the center more circular. I tried cutting these little pie pieces with a center piece already cut out, but it didn't really turn out very circular in the middle. So this is the way that worked best for me. And then after drawing that inner circle, I trimmed away the fabric, leaving about a 1/4 inch for my seam allowance. And then I went around and used my small scissors and put some little slits in here with my scissors. I cut all the way up to that pencil or that chalk line. You probably saw I used pencil for half and chalk for the other half so that I could see the circle on this light and dark fabric. After placing my circle on my background square, I took a needle and thread and gave myself some really big basting stitches to keep my circle in place while I do my applique. I chose a neutral thread, this gray. It kind of goes with both the blue and the pink. It kind of blended in a little bit. more. It's often wise to choose a color that matches your fabric, but with these two colors, it was kind of tricky to decide on a color to use. So I turned the edge under and just worked around the outside of my circle. Was done with the outside of the circle, I went to the inside and I did the same thing, just tucking those edges under and stitching all the way around. For my leaves, I am using a cardboard template and I'm going to draw the leaf pattern on the back of my fabric. The pattern available in my Etsy shop also includes a seam allowance. So this cardboard is the pattern minus the seam allowance because I'm going to be using that cardboard for pressing my little applique piece here. I'm going to press it using some starch. I've done this a few times on my channel. It just helps me as I work. There are multiple ways of doing applique, and this is the way that I'm going to be doing applique today on this beautiful quilt block. After getting all of my leaves ready, I covered my ironing board with some fabric and I sprayed the back side of my leaves with some starch. And now I'm going to use that cardboard template and press in all of the edges to prepare them for some applique. This is a beautiful quilt block that I'm calling Vintage Circle. I love this beautiful quilt and I can't wait to get it completed for its owner. The original applique that came with these leftover blocks from another quilter, and I'm going to make just a simplified version. Here's my background square, 12.5 inches. I have some floral fabric, some solids, and I'm going to be using interfacing. First thing I did was I measured that outside petal area with the floral fabric, and it's about 4 inches by 4 inches. So using a square, I folded it in half, and I cut out a heart shape, sort of with a square bottom, just about the same size as the original applique design. And I will cut 4 of these, or I'll be using this for my pattern for the heart shape. I folded my square in half twice to get an idea of the 4 quadrants, how big they were, and I laid my pattern down and it looks like it's going to work. I also want to cut 4 green leaves, sort of like that original quilt. Mine will be just a little bit different, and here's my rough sketch of what I was aiming for in my quilt block. So I'm going to take my paper and just cut a sort of a leaf design like that original. I cut half of it and then I realized I really needed to fold that so both sides are the same, and I just followed my line there and cut that out, and that will be the pattern for my green fabric. I also want some circles. On the outside, the original quilt has sort of a pointy center to the flower, sort of a bud, and mine are going to be circles. I used my pattern and I used a pencil and drew my design on the back of my fabric, and I need to leave room for a 1/4 inch seam because I'll be joining my fabric with the interfacing. Now I'm going to use the pattern for the green fabric, and I used a pencil and I can see it okay. I did want to see what this white chalk, how that would work, and I mostly for your benefit, and there you can see that white chalk marker does a really good job. It's just not as easy to go around the pattern piece. So I will end up using a pencil for 4 of these little green leaf designs that I'll be using on my applique block. I will not be using interfacing for the circles. I'll just be pressing those. So I got some cardboard out and I used that with my pattern, and I will cut out a cardboard circle, and I will do the circles just a little bit differently in this applique project. Most of my items are now ready to be prepared, and I'm going to take the prints, the flower petals, let's call them, the heart shapes here, and I'm going to put right sides together with my lightweight interfacing, and I will be using that print as my guide. I'll cut around the pattern, the fabric pattern there, and then I'll sew on the pencil line. Now that all of my pieces are cut out, I'm going to sit down at my machine and I will sew right along my pencil line. After getting everything sewn together, I put a little slit in the back into the interfacing, and I was able to turn these little applique pieces right side out. After getting a few of the elements ready for my quilt block here, I laid them out and decided how big the center circle should be, and I made it out of cardboard. Like I said, I'm going to be doing this one a little bit different. I'm going to be using starch and my iron to get this one prepared for applique. I covered the wool mat with some fabric because I know the wool mats don't do well with starch, and I just sprayed that starch right on the cotton and used my cardboard and then pressed all around to get this circle ready for my quilt block. Last but not least, I will be cutting 4 red circles, quite a bit smaller, and I will be preparing these the same way that I did that yellow circle in the center of my block. Everything's now ready for applique, and I thought I would compare the two quilt blocks. Mine is quite a bit simpler, and first thing I had to do was find green thread that matched that green leaf element, and then I'll get some red thread, and later, last thing I will applique is that yellow circle. The interfacing I'm using is fusible, and the fusible part of the interfacing is not that great, but I did want to take advantage of the little bit of fusible that's on there, and I thought I would press these pieces and hopefully they will just be a little more stable while I am appliquing. I did need to add some pins. They stick a little bit, but not really great. But that was just a little bit of help for me as I appliqued these pieces on. So beginning with the applique pieces that are under, I'm beginning with the red because that's under the green, and then I'll do the green leaf because that's under the flower petal shape, that heart shape, and I'll just work from the outside in with thread that matches, and before you know it, I'll have a quilt block. I wanted to mention that when using this white interfacing, it's really helpful if you can try to catch the fabric as you come up from the back. You want to try to just catch the fabric and get that interfacing to recede. If you take your needle through the interfacing, it might show up. So I tried to kind of push the interfacing under and just catch the green fabric as I went around, and then I did the same thing with, of course, the other pieces. This is the third block in this sampler quilt I'm calling the Friendly Sampler. It was a fun block to put together, and I look forward to joining you with a new one very soon. Behind me I have a vintage quilt. It's a Scotty dog, a very classic pattern. I haven't found this exact pattern as I was doing my research, so I did draw out a pattern, and I have a little example right here. I'm going to go over it, but I'll also have a pattern available in my Etsy shop if you're interested. So this quilt top is two-sided, but there is no batting, and there's an opening down here in the bottom like a pillowcase, and I'm curious if the quilter wanted a very lightweight quilt, if they were going to be stuffing like a comforter inside, or if it was unfinished. I'm just not sure, but it's beautiful, and I thought I'd show you how to do it. Let's get started. Here are the supplies that I need for just one of those little Scotty dog quilt blocks. I have an 11-inch square for the background, and here's my pattern that I'll be cutting with scissors. And I have a print square that's 6 inches that will be plenty big enough for the body of the Scotty dog. And then I have a solid that I'll be using for the head and the legs of this applique pattern. Little pattern that I made that I'm using here has the sewing lines and little dots to show where to stop sewing. That gives you room to turn under the edges. So I'll put the head with the body, and I gave myself a little dot there to show when to stop sewing. So I'm going to put this Scotty dog all together, and then I'm going to take it to my ironing board, and I'm going to press the raw edges back. After pressing all of the raw edges in on my little applique dog hair, I am going to place him in the center of my square, sort of at an angle like the original quilter did, and as I go around I'll just turn that raw edge under. Now that I've pressed it, the fabric sort of has a memory of where to go, and I'm going to be using just a straight stitch, sort of a broken line all the way around this dog with some black embroidery floss. The pattern gives you a placement for the eye, and I'm just doing 3 short little lines right next to each other to make the eye for my dog hair, and then I'll add the nose and whiskers just with some straight stitches with this black thread. This is a super cute little quilt block, and I love the vintage quilt that I was able to duplicate here. And again, the pattern is available if you're interested. I'm beginning with a vine, a blue vine that I prepared ahead of time. I folded it into thirds and I added that white basting stitch, and now I'm appliquing with my machine with a blue thread that will match the fabric. And when I'm done sewing that vine on both sides, I'll take a little pair of scissors and I'll snip those basting stitches, and they tend to pull right out. If I just, yeah, they come right out. It doesn't take too long. And then my vine is ready to go, and I can add the leaves and the berries, the flowers, whatever I want to add on there. And today I'm just using some leftover circles. Some are some yo-yos, and some are felted wool. So I just put some circles on there, and now I'm going to start with my first applique method, which is using freezer paper. And I'll be using this leaf for all 4 of my different applique methods. So I just drew the leaf on the freezer paper, and now I'm going to attach it to the back side of my blue fabric for a leaf, and then I'll press it on. You can reuse this leaf too. It is good for a few leaves, so you don't have to cut a leaf for every single piece applique you're doing, especially if you're doing a repeat like I'm doing. So I'm trimming the corners so that I can get rid of some of that bulk, and then I use some starch. I have this Best Press starch that I like, and I take a little kids paintbrush and I paint it around the edges, and that paintbrush is taped onto the back so it's always ready to go. And then I use my iron and I just press those edges in. And here's my second leaf. I made 2 for this project. So I'll pin it on and I will stitch it with some thin thread. Just use a thread that matches. Doesn't have to be this thin applique thread that I have, but as long as it's a thread that matches, it really helps to hide the stitches. And now I'm going to show you another way to applique using that same leaf as my pattern. This typically you would use interfacing, and I'll do that next, but in this example I am going to use that leaf. I've given myself a little extra fabric on the edge there for the seam allowance, and I'm using muslin fabric. So I have right sides together, and I drew a pattern with a pencil, and now I'm sewing around all the way around. And now I will trim using that leaf as my pattern and snip off the edges. And what we're going to do is we're going to have a finished leaf that we will turn right side out, and the edges will be all finished, ready to go. So in the back, you've got to be careful when you snip this that you don't cut your leaf, your pretty leaf on the front, and then just take something like a bamboo skewer and get that leaf turned right side out. Poke the corners and get the corners nice and sharp, and you'll be ready to sew that onto your project. Your applique piece will be all ready to go. The edges are all inside, and using fabric is just a little bit thicker than using interfacing. I have some very thin interfacing that I'm going to show you next. There's my interfacing, and it's usually fusible, and this is fusible, but I'm not worrying about the fusible part. I'm just going to pretend it's fabric, and I'm going to mark it like I did the last one, and this produces a little bit thinner of a applique piece than if you're using that muslin. So I'll sew around just like I did the last one, and just basically the same method. Sew around, cut open that back and turn it right side out. Just be careful if you do press this, you're going to want to be careful, because if this is fusible interfacing and the fusible is on the outside there, it's going to stick to your ironing board. So it might be best to put the fusible side on the inside. And there's my piece ready to be appliqued on. So that's kind of a fun way to get your leaf ready to applique without a lot of work. Now I'm going to show you how I might applique needle turn, and I use a pencil. Pencil is very safe. It washes right out, and if you get your edges in, you probably won't even notice that the pencil line is there. But pencil's a safe marking tool to use whenever you need to mark something. So I have my marking on the outside. I'm going to pin it down there, and then I will follow my pencil line and just tuck in the edges as I go around. And this is a method that I use most often, probably, because it's very portable. I don't have to prepare things ahead of time. I don't have to do that. I don't have to go to the ironing board to press anything. It's just ready to go. And again, you'll want to use a thread that matches your applique piece. And now we're going to talk about fusible. So this is something I already had in my stash. I thought I'd just show you. You press the fusible onto the back of the fabric. There's a lot of brands. I'll link down below. The Steam 2 Light is my favorite because it's not very thick, it's very thin, and I'm cutting out a leaf that's already been fused, and then you take the fusible off, and the back should be sticky. Not sticky, but that's the sticky side. It's smooth, but you can tell that the glue is on that side, and then you just press it onto your project there, and it should stick. So I pulled out my mother-in-law's, and see, all my leaves are pretty much the same, even though I'm using some different methods here today. I pulled out my mother-in-law's old machine because it has a zigzag stitch, and for fusible applique that you raw edge applique, you want a zigzag stitch, which this is the only machine at my house that has zigzags. So I pull it out when I need a zigzag, and you'll want to use thread that matches. You'll want to use your smallest zigzag stitch and try to get that stitch, a small stitch, so that the zigzags are really close together. And you just stitch around on the edge, and it blends in pretty well, but everybody has a different preference as far as applique goes. And now I'm going to applique that little circle on. It's felted wool, and it's pretty much the same as raw edge. You could also do a blanket stitch by hand, which I'm not talking about today, but there's a lot of ways to do applique. These are some of my favorites. Thank you for joining me today, and I'll see you next time.